And speaking of new features here on the Sound Off, we have a new segment I'd like to introduce called This Week's Sad Tweet. Yes, this week's sad tweet comes from @Zack Ryder. This is what he posted earlier in the week. He said, "It's a sad day. I now have 0 items for sale on WWEshop.com. Hashtag decent run." Poor bastard. And in fact, it is true. If you go on WWE Shop, there are no more Zack Ryder items available. He used to have the spiked hair wig, and he had t-shirts, he had glasses, and nothing. Just nothing. And it's depressing to watch this poor guy just collapse into a heap of nothing. And he'll post all of these depressing tweets like during Raw, "I'm so happy to be here at Raw, ... in catering," and like the self-deprecating humor, but you know that deep down, like this guy is just in this emotional pain. Like he can't believe he went from where he was to where he is now. And on some level, I feel sorry for the guy, I really do. And part of it also is the fact that he went out, he made something of himself in spite of the company doing absolutely nothing with him. He just got tired of it, and he said, "Listen, I'm either going to get fired, or I'm going to get them to push me. I'm going to get them to notice me." And that's when he launched his YouTube show. He did 100 episodes of that before he called it quits. I think halfway through, WWE had him move the show over to their YouTube channel, and that's when things started to go downhill because they wanted control over it. They would cut some content from it, and the show really wasn't his anymore. But when he started doing it, it took off, and people started to notice him, and he was a nothing on the roster. He was a mid-card, not even mid-card, low-card guy on the roster who had no direction, who had no program, no feud, no future. And he made something of himself. And it got to the point where, WWE had no choice but to acknowledge it. And they said, hey, maybe we could do something here. Maybe we can make some money off this guy. And I think that's when they started making some merchandise for him. And what really got their attention was when he was cracking the top 10 in terms of merchandise. So that's the quickest way to get Vince McMahon's attention, I would imagine, is when they look at the merchandise numbers and they see your name pop up on there, and you're in the top 10, the top 5, I don't know how high he went, that's going to get their attention. So they started to push him. They never pushed him as any sort of, serious threat or serious character. He had the goofy gimmick, but it worked for him. You've got to have goofy guys on the roster. Somebody has to play that role. Santino plays his role fine. Zack Ryder was a goofball character who the fans got behind. And they put the U.S. title on him. I never forget, Survivor Series in 2011, Madison Square Garden, right? They say the hardest building in the world to get over in. And The Rock was making his comeback that night. First time in 8 years that The Rock was wrestling a match. And all night people were chanting Zack Ryder. Even after the show is over. And The Rock is standing in the ring making this emotional, heartfelt speech, and he's drowned out by chants for "We Want Ryder," to the point where The Rock had to acknowledge it and put the guy over on the mic. I mean, that had to be probably the highlight of the guy's career. I can imagine the smile on ear to ear backstage that he must have had listening to that. And it didn't last very long. They put him in that angle with Eve and with John Cena, where he was friends with John Cena. John Cena would wear his merchandise and put the guy over, and we all know what happens on TV when you end up as John Cena's friend. Normally doesn't end very well. And it didn't end well for Zack. He ended up in a body cast. He was beaten up every single week by Kane, made to look like an even bigger goofball. He had already lost the U.S. title by that point. He was being wheeled around in a wheelchair and a neck brace. And it was just a slow descent back into nothingness for the guy, even though he was still over. And it just didn't matter to them. They felt like they went as far as they could with him. I think, and this is my own personal opinion, that they saw the reaction to him and they saw he was starting to move some numbers and they reluctantly gave him a push. He was probably the one guy who got a big push in WWE who the company absolutely did not want to push, but they felt like they had to do something. So they gave him a little bit of a push, and they put the U.S. title on him, which meant less than dog shit, and to some degree still does. Maybe dog shit's a little harsh. Maybe cat vomit. How about that? It's not like that title has meant much of anything in recent years, but they put it on him. I'm sure to him it meant something. And they gave him a nice little decent run for a few weeks or a couple months, and then after that it's like, all right, we got to get this guy out of this position. How can we embarrass him? How can we bring him back down to earth and let him know you are not in control of your own destiny? We are in control of your destiny. I think that was the message that was being sent there. They resent it when people get over on their own. And that goes to something that just annoys the fuck out of me. And Kurt Hawkins, who is one of the people just released by WWE, he did an interview. And in this interview, he talked about the Zack Ryder push. And him and Zack are friends. They were tag team partners. They were the edge heads at one point. So maybe he's a little bit biased, but he told the whole story about the moment that crushed the soul of the locker room. All those low-card, mid-card guys in the back who were just looking for a chance, trying to get themselves over, trying to get something going. And what crushed their soul, what just completely damaged their spirit, was watching what happened to Zack Ryder, a guy who got himself over in spite of everything. And they were rooting for him. They thought it was really cool. Look at this guy. Look what he's doing. This is badass. And then they saw what happened after that. They saw the end result, and it just crushed their spirit. And it's not hard to see why. There were a lot of guys who tried to follow in Ryder's footsteps, including Hawkins. Hawkins started his own YouTube show. It didn't last very long. But there were a lot of guys who tried to follow his lead. It didn't work out for them, and then they saw what happened to the guy, and it's like all those times that they tell you got to reach for the brass ring, right? That's one of Vince McMahon's expressions. If you hear that brass ring expression, it comes from Vince. You got to reach up for that brass ring and grab it. You got to make your own opportunities. You got to make your own push. I've heard Jim Ross say that before. It is such bullshit. It is such bullshit. And plenty of guys who have worked... I've never worked for the company before, but plenty of guys who have, including Hawkins, have said the same thing. It is bullshit. And Zack Ryder is a classic case of that. So as sad and pathetic as it is to follow his tweets sometimes, and it really is very depressing, I have a lot of sympathy for the guy. I see where he's coming from. And having 0 items now for sale in WWE shop may not be a good indicator of his future, which is why I made the comment on Twitter that he might want to do something to try to find his way on Total Divas. That might be the only way he can protect his job. You know, they're still cutting costs and cutting people, and I don't know, if I'm Zack Ryder, I'd be a little concerned about that.